The day the lake called me, it wasn't loud. It was just ordinary. The kind of morning that makes you think nothing new will ever happen again. I had just finished my cup of tea, chamomile, like always. The house smelled faintly of lemon oil from the wooden floors I'd polished the night before. Outside, Maple Ridge Lake lay still, blanketed in thin mist. Autumn leaves floated lazily on its surface, painting streaks of red and gold on the water. For most people, it was just another day. But for me, it was the day something deep within me woke up again. I'd lived by that lake for 30 years. Raised my son, Daniel, here. Buried my husband, Mark, here too. Time had turned my house into a museum of memories. Quiet, almost sacred. I'd learned to live with the silence. Sometimes I even thought the silence loved me back. Until that morning. It started as a faint noise, like the wind brushing through reeds. Then, a second sound, sharper, rhythmic. A cry. I froze by the window, the cup trembling slightly in my hands. It came again. Not an echo. Not the wind. A sound that sliced through the stillness of dawn. Soft, fragile, human. Without thinking, I slipped on my old cardigan and stepped out. The air bit at my cheeks. The closer I got to the dock, the stronger the sound became. And then I saw it. A dark shape bobbing near the shore, something rectangular, wrapped in leather straps, heavy but moving. I waded in, water soaking through my shoes. The suitcase was half submerged, caught against a rock. For a heartbeat, I stood there, my breath clouding the air, my heart beating too fast for someone my age. Part of me whispered, "Call the sheriff." But another voice, older, deeper, almost maternal, said, "Open it." My fingers trembled as I pulled the case onto the grass. It was old, scuffed, smelled of rain and rust. The cry came again, muffled, weak, desperate. I unlatched the buckle. Inside, wrapped in a thin wool blanket, was a baby. Still breathing. Still alive. For a long moment, I couldn't move. My mind tried to make sense of what my eyes saw. A newborn, no more than a few days old, his skin pale as porcelain, his lips trembling in the cold. I touched his tiny hand. It closed around my finger with surprising strength. That one touch broke something open in me I thought had long died. I whispered, "You're safe now, sweetheart. You're safe." I ran inside, wrapping the baby in the first warm towel I found. My hands shook as I tried to light the fireplace. My heart felt too full, like it might burst from both fear and wonder. When the flames finally caught, I sat on the rug and held him close. He stopped crying, just stared at me with eyes so dark and deep they reminded me of Daniel when he was born. The same small nose, the same stubborn way of breathing, like he already knew life wouldn't be easy. And that's when the tears came. Quiet, reluctant tears I hadn't cried in years. I thought about Daniel, about the accident, the phone call, the years of trying to forgive a world that had taken my child. I thought I'd made peace. But holding that baby, I realized peace wasn't the same as healing. He whimpered again, and I hummed, an old tune my mother used to sing. "Hush now, the water's wide, but love will find you on the other side." My voice cracked halfway through, but he didn't seem to mind. When the ambulance finally arrived, I could barely let go of him. The paramedics asked for my name, but all I could say was, "Make sure he's warm." At the hospital, the nurses whispered, as they do in small towns. Words like abandoned and unbelievable floated through the hallway. But when the doctor came out, his face softened. "He's underweight but strong," he said. "You saved him, ma'am. Saved him." No one had said that word to me in a long, long time. The sheriff came by later, a tall man with kind eyes. "Mrs. Ellison," he began, "we'll need to take your statement." The suitcase was found with no ID, no note. "We'll investigate. Likely someone in trouble." I nodded, but my heart was still in the nursery down the hall. I could hear faint sounds, nurses cooing, soft lullabies playing. Something inside me whispered, "Don't walk away yet." That night, as I sat in the waiting room, the fluorescent lights buzzing above me, I opened my old journal, the one I hadn't touched since Daniel's funeral. On the first page I wrote, "Today, the lake gave something back." I didn't know why I felt it, but somehow, that baby wasn't just found, he was returned. I didn't know whose child he was. I didn't know why someone had left him there. But I knew this much. That cry wasn't just his. It was mine too, a sound I'd buried deep inside for years. And maybe, just maybe, this was the lake's way of saying, it's time to heal. The morning after felt unreal. The air smelled of antiseptic and rain. The hospital corridors echoed with soft footsteps and murmurs, a rhythm that somehow made my heart beat slower, calmer. I sat by the window, watching the parking lot fill with morning fog. Somewhere down the hall, I could hear him, the baby, crying again, but softer now. Familiar. Almost comforting. When Nurse April came by, she smiled kindly. "Mrs. Ellison, the baby's doing much better. He's responding well. He's lucky you found him when you did." Lucky. It's a strange word. Daniel used to say that luck was just God's way of hiding his fingerprints. April placed a hand on my shoulder. "Would you like to see him?" I hesitated. Part of me feared that if I looked again, I'd feel something I couldn't let go of. But I nodded. They led me into the neonatal room. Tiny cribs lined the walls, each holding a story too small to tell. When I reached his crib, he was asleep, his tiny chest rising and falling in steady rhythm. A blue tag on the side read, "Baby Doe." No name. Just a placeholder for a life that had barely begun. I leaned closer. His fingers twitched, his eyelids fluttered. I whispered, "You don't know it yet, but you already belong to the world, little one." For a moment, I thought I heard Daniel's laugh, faint, like a memory breaking through water. When Daniel was born, he'd made the same restless noises in his sleep, the same tiny fists that refused to stay still. Back then, I used to think it meant he'd be strong-willed. I wasn't wrong. But life has a way of humbling even the strongest hearts. A knock on the door pulled me back. Sheriff Cole stepped in, hat in hand. "Mrs. Ellison, we're running some checks. No missing infant reports yet. Could be someone from out of town." He paused, his voice gentle. "You did a good thing, ma'am. But, are you sure you're all right?" I nodded, though part of me wasn't. "I'll be fine." He smiled, tipping his hat slightly. "You remind me of my mother. Never stopped to rest when there was someone to save." After he left, I looked back at the baby. The truth is, I hadn't felt fine in years. I'd survived loss, yes. But I'd never really healed. There's a difference between surviving and living. And somehow, holding that baby had made me realize, I'd been surviving far too long. That evening, I returned home. The house greeted me with the same stillness it always had. Photos of Daniel and Mark smiling from the mantel, the clock ticking in its polite rhythm, the faint creak of old floorboards as if the house itself exhaled when I stepped in. I set my coat on the chair and stood by the fireplace. On the mantel was a framed picture of Daniel at 16. Messy hair, proud smile, a fishing rod slung over his shoulder. The lake behind him shimmered with late summer light. He'd loved that lake. He'd said it was alive, that water could hear. I used to laugh at that. Now I wasn't so sure. I whispered, "You sent him to me, didn't you?" Of course, no answer came. Just the soft hiss of the heater and the ticking of time. But deep down something stirred, a fragile belief that maybe, just maybe, Daniel had found a way to tell me I wasn't done yet. The next few days passed in a quiet rhythm of phone calls, police updates, and unanswered questions. No one came forward. No missing reports matched. The news stations called it the Maple Ridge Miracle. I called it a responsibility I didn't ask for but couldn't ignore. April began visiting after her shifts. She'd bring photos, updates, sometimes baby blankets knitted by volunteers. "You should see him, Ruth," she said one afternoon. He smiles when he hears your voice recordings. My voice recordings? I asked, surprised. She nodded. Remember when we asked you to talk near him that first night? He turns his head when we play it back. It's the sweetest thing. I smiled, though my heart ached. Maybe he just remembers the sound of panic, I said softly. April shook her head. No. Babies remember warmth. And yours is the first warmth he ever felt. Her words sank in deeper than I expected. That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat by the window, looking out at the lake. The moon shimmered on the water's surface like a secret that didn't want to stay buried. I whispered into the glass, if someone out there is missing him, please, let them come. But the lake stayed silent, calm, almost knowing. 2 days later, the sheriff called. Mrs. Ellison, we may have something. A woman was seen near the lake that night. Young, mid-20s, blonde, wearing a blue coat. No one recognized her. We're checking motel logs. A chill ran through me. Not fear. Intuition. I didn't know her. But somehow, I felt as though the lake did. The next morning, I baked muffins. Blueberry. Daniel's favorite. Habit, maybe. Grief has a funny way of clinging to old rituals. As I waited for them to cool, I found myself humming again, the same lullaby. That's when the phone rang. A trembling voice on the other end asked, Is this Mrs. Ellison? The woman who found the baby? Yes, I said carefully. Who is this? The voice cracked. I can't say yet. But I need to see him. Please. I didn't mean to. And then the line went dead. I stood frozen, the phone still pressed to my ear. Outside, the lake glimmered faintly through the kitchen window. Peaceful, patient, as if waiting for me to understand something I couldn't yet name. I whispered, Daniel, what are you trying to tell me this time? I didn't sleep that night. Every creak of the house sounded like footsteps. Every whisper of the wind felt like someone calling my name. The phone call played again and again in my head, that trembling voice, the unspoken plea hiding between broken breaths. By dawn, I'd made up my mind. I couldn't just wait. The sheriff had enough rules to follow, but I had something he didn't, a feeling. A pull. I made a pot of coffee, packed some biscuits in a paper bag, and drove toward town. The morning fog rolled thick along the lake road, curling through the pines like ghosts reluctant to leave. Halfway there, I saw a figure by the side of the road. A young woman. Blue coat. Her arms were wrapped around herself, her hair a tangled mess, and she looked so lost, the kind of lost that comes from running too long without knowing where you're going. I slowed the car and rolled down the window. Do you need help, dear? She turned her head slowly. Her face was pale, her eyes red and swollen. For a second, I saw something, not guilt, not fear, something more fragile. Shame. I shouldn't be here, she murmured. Where should you be then? I asked gently. She shook her head, a tear sliding down her cheek. Nowhere. There's nowhere left. I stepped out of the car and handed her the paper bag. You look hungry. Sit for a while. She hesitated, then sat on the small rock near the road. Her fingers trembled as she unwrapped a biscuit, taking small, cautious bites. After a while, she whispered, You're the woman who found the baby, aren't you? My breath caught. Yes, I said slowly. How do you know that? Her eyes glistened. Because he's mine. For a long moment, the world went quiet. The lake shimmered in the distance, still, watching. I felt my chest tighten, not in anger, but in disbelief. Yours. She nodded, tears streaming now. I didn't mean to leave him. I swear. I was scared. I thought he was gone. When he didn't cry anymore, Her voice broke, collapsing into her hands. I sat beside her, the cold stone biting through my coat. The morning sun was just starting to break through the mist, casting slivers of gold on the lake. What's your name, dear? Mara. How old are you? 24. And the baby? His name is Samuel, she said, voice barely above a whisper. At least, that's what I wanted to name him. Samuel. A name that means, heard by God. It almost made me smile. Almost. I listened as she spoke, haltingly at first, then with the release of someone who'd carried too much alone. She had come from 2 towns over. Her mother had passed. Her father had left when she was 13. She worked at a diner, met a man who promised her love, then disappeared the moment she said she was pregnant. I was alone, she said. And when the time came, I didn't know what to do. I had no money, no help. I gave birth in a shed behind an old cabin near the woods. It was raining so hard that night I thought no one would ever hear me. Her fingers twisted the edge of her coat. He didn't cry at first. I thought, maybe he wasn't breathing. I panicked. I wrapped him, tried to keep him warm, but he was so cold, so still. I thought I'd lost him. I couldn't bear it. I put him in the suitcase and... She stopped. Her shoulders trembled violently. And I walked to the lake. I don't remember throwing it. I just remember the sound. And then I ran. I wanted to say something, to tell her what she did was unforgivable. But the words wouldn't come. Because when I looked at her, I saw a reflection of something I once knew. A woman drowning, not in water, but in despair. Do you want to see him? I asked quietly. She looked up, eyes wide. Can I? If you're telling the truth, then yes. But you'll need to come with me to the sheriff first. Tell them everything. She nodded weakly. Will they take him away? I sighed. They'll do what's best for him. That's their job. Maura stared at the ground. I'm not fit to be his mother. Maybe not yet, I said. But admitting that means you still care. We drove to the sheriff's office in silence. She sat beside me, small and quiet, like a child trying not to take up space. I kept glancing at her through the corner of my eye, the way she held her hands tight, the way she flinched every time the car hit a bump. When we arrived, Sheriff Cole stepped out. He looked from me to Maura, his brow furrowing. This her? Yes, I said. She came to me. Maura's voice shook as she told her story again. The sheriff didn't interrupt, didn't judge. When she finished, he said softly, You're lucky, young lady. If Mrs. Ellison hadn't been there. He didn't finish the sentence. I know, she whispered. I know. He took her statement, then nodded to me. We'll check her story. But, Ruth, you might want to come by the hospital later. They'll need confirmation of identity, maybe a DNA test. I nodded. Maura looked at me like someone standing on the edge of a cliff, waiting for permission to fall. Do you hate me? She asked suddenly. I thought about it. About how easy it is to hate someone when you don't know their story. About how much harder it is when you do. No, I said finally. But I do pity you. Tears welled up again in her eyes. I deserve that. That night, back home, I stood on the porch looking out at the lake again. The same lake that had once taken so much from me, and now had given something back. The moonlight glimmered across the ripples, like soft silver threads weaving together all the broken pieces of our lives. I whispered into the night, maybe that's what mercy looks like, not the absence of guilt, but the presence of grace. Inside, the phone rang. It was April. Ruth, she said, her voice trembling with excitement. The baby's stable, stronger than ever. You should come see him tomorrow. I smiled. I will. And for the first time in years, I didn't dread tomorrow. The hospital smelled of lavender that morning. Maybe the nurses had placed sachets in the halls again, a small kindness to soften the sting of bleach and sorrow. I walked in with a calm that didn't feel real. Maura was already there, sitting on a bench near the nursery window. Her hands were folded tight in her lap. She looked smaller somehow, as if shame had made her shrink into herself. When she saw me, she stood up quickly. They said they'll run a DNA test. To prove it. I nodded. That's the right thing to do. She looked down, her voice trembling. I know everyone thinks I'm a monster. I don't, I said quietly. She blinked, startled. Why? Because monsters don't cry when they remember their mistakes. Her lip quivered, and for a second, I thought she'd collapse again. But she didn't. She just nodded and whispered, "Thank you." While the tests were being arranged, we sat in the waiting area. April passed by, carrying a clipboard, and gave me a soft smile. "He's doing wonderfully," she said. "He even smiled this morning." I felt warmth spread through me. A real smile or just gas? April laughed. The good kind. Mara looked up, her voice fragile. "Can I see him?" April hesitated. "Just for a few minutes." The sheriff agreed. They led us into the nursery. The baby lay in a small crib, swaddled in soft blue. The tiny rise and fall of his chest was like the rhythm of hope itself. Mara reached out, but stopped just before touching him. Her fingers hovered in the air, trembling. "He looks different." I smiled faintly. "A little warmth can do that." She turned to me, eyes glistening. "Do you think he'll ever forgive me?" I didn't answer right away. Because how could I promise forgiveness on behalf of someone who couldn't yet speak? So I said the only truth I knew. Children have a strange way of remembering love more than pain. But first, you'll have to forgive yourself. Later that afternoon, Sheriff Cole came by the hospital. He spoke with Mara in private for a while, then asked me to stay. "We'll have the test results tomorrow," he said. "But something doesn't quite line up." I frowned. "What do you mean?" He rubbed the back of his neck. "We found the cabin Mara mentioned, but there's no trace of childbirth. No blankets, no blood, nothing. It looked untouched." I felt a cold shiver crawl up my spine. Maybe someone cleaned it. He shook his head. "No one's been there in months. We checked the logs." Mara overheard him, her face pale. "I was there. I swear. I gave birth alone by the fireplace. There was an old chair." Cole raised a hand. "I'm not saying you're lying. I'm saying something doesn't match. We'll get answers soon." She sat down, tears brimming again. "I know what I saw. I know what I did." I touched her hand. "Then let the truth do its work. It always does." That night I couldn't rest. The rain came hard, tapping against the window like 1,000 tiny questions. I sat in the armchair by the fireplace, staring at the flames, trying to quiet the unease building in my chest. Something about her story bothered me. Not her fear, not her guilt, but the details. The road she claimed to have taken didn't even lead to the lake's edge. I told myself it didn't matter. That the baby was safe, that was what counted. But grief teaches you to listen to whispers others ignore. And that night, something inside whispered, "There's more beneath the surface." The next morning, I drove back to the hospital before sunrise. The halls were quiet, washed in soft gold light. April was finishing her shift. "You're early," she said, rubbing her eyes. "I couldn't sleep," I admitted. "Any news?" She hesitated. "Actually, yes. The sheriff came by an hour ago. The lab sent the DNA results earlier than expected." My heart thudded. "And?" April exhaled slowly. "Mara. She's not the mother." The world seemed to tilt. "What?" "She's not a genetic match," April said softly. "The test shows zero relation. Not even distant." I stood there in silence, the sound of machines and faint baby cries blurring around me. "So she lied." "Maybe not entirely," April said. "Sometimes people convince themselves of things. Trauma can twist memory." I didn't answer. All I could see in my mind was Mara's trembling hands, her tears, her guilt, and yet, none of it belonged to the truth. When I found her later, sitting outside near the hospital garden, she looked hollow, They said the test was wrong, she said before I could speak. It has to be wrong.
Mara, I said softly. They ran it twice.
She shook her head violently. No. He's mine. I remember his face, his cry. Her voice broke into a sob. Please believe me. I wanted to. God knows I wanted to. But something deeper told me this was no longer about belief.
It's possible, I said carefully, that you were there, but not as his mother.
Her breathing hitched. What do you mean? I don't know yet, I whispered. But I think the lake hasn't told us everything. As I drove home that evening, the sun dipped low behind the trees, casting long golden streaks across the water. The lake was calm again, too calm, like it was keeping a secret. I parked by the dock and stood there, the wind tugging at my scarf. For the first time, I noticed something glinting near the rocks, a fragment of glass, half buried in mud. I knelt down and brushed it clean. It was a piece of a car's side mirror. Not old, maybe a few days at most. I looked toward the narrow path leading down from the road, the same path where I'd first seen the suitcase. And for the first time since that day, I felt the lake's silence wasn't peaceful. It was watchful. The glass shard in my hand gleamed like an eye that refused to blink. It caught the sunset light and scattered it across the lake in trembling streaks, gold, red, and something almost sorrowful. I stood there for a long while, the cold wind brushing against my hair, whispering through the reeds. It felt as if the lake was speaking again. But this time, I didn't like what it was saying. I turned the mirror over in my palm. There were small scratches, numbers, maybe. I squinted. 72 times 10 to the power of 4. It looked like part of a license plate marking, printed in faint white ink. Someone's car had been here, recently. And if this mirror belonged to the same car that brought the suitcase, then the story Mara told wasn't just wrong. It was someone else's truth she'd borrowed. That night, I couldn't bring myself to go inside. I sat on the porch swing, wrapped in a shawl, staring at the rippling reflection of the moon. The lake had always been both friend and enemy. It gave life and swallowed it, depending on its mood. I thought of Daniel again. The night of his accident had been stormy too. They'd said his car went off the bridge near the same bend where the water ran deepest. I remember the call. The way my teacup had slipped from my hand and shattered. The way my knees gave out before I even understood what had been said. Back then, I'd asked a question no one could answer. Why that night? And now, years later, I was asking the same thing again. Why here? Why me? Why this child? Sometimes, when grief lingers too long, it stops feeling like sadness and starts feeling like a signal, a beacon calling something unfinished back to shore. The next morning, I took the mirror fragment to Sheriff Cole. He looked at it through his magnifier, then nodded. You've got good eyes, Mrs. Ellison. This is from a side mirror, probably off a sedan. Newer model. We'll run it through our system. He glanced up at me. You sure you want to keep being involved in this? I gave him a tired smile. I was involved the moment I heard that baby cry. He chuckled softly. Fair enough. We'll let you know what we find. As I left his office, I saw Mara sitting outside again. Same blue coat, same faraway look. Did you talk to them? I asked. She nodded weakly. They told me I'm not his mother. There was no anger in her voice now. Only emptiness. I guess I just wanted him to be mine so badly. I started believing it. I sat down beside her. Sometimes the heart confuses longing with memory. She looked up, eyes glistening. But I still feel like I know him. Like I've held him before. Maybe not him, I said softly. But maybe someone you loved and lost. She didn't reply, just buried her face in her hands. And as I watched her cry, I realized something strange. For the first time in years, I didn't feel alone in my pain. That afternoon, I visited the hospital again. April greeted me at the entrance, her usual cheer dulled by exhaustion. The baby's fine, she said quickly. He's gaining weight, his color's better. But what? We ran the DNA against the National Missing Persons Database, she said. And we got a match. A partial one. My heart skipped. From who? She hesitated. A woman named Emily Rhodes. She disappeared 8 months ago, 6 months pregnant at the time. I felt the air leave my lungs. Where? 2 towns east. Near Millstone Bridge. Millstone. The same bridge where Daniel had crashed. April continued. They never found her. Just her car, abandoned near the riverbank. No signs of struggle. Everyone assumed she'd taken her own life. I stared at the wall behind April, the soft cream paint suddenly swimming before my eyes. Daniel had worked at Millstone Construction. That bridge had been one of his projects. Could it be coincidence? Or was the universe weaving its invisible threads again? Cruel, but precise. That evening, I went through Daniel's old belongings. Boxes of papers, photos, tools. And at the very bottom, in a folder I didn't remember ever seeing before, I found something that made my knees weaken. A photo, Daniel and a woman standing beside a half-built bridge. Her hair was tied back, her smile gentle. On the back, in Daniel's handwriting, Emily, the one with the brave eyes. My hands trembled. If Emily Rhodes was the same woman who disappeared, and if she'd been pregnant, then that baby wasn't just anyone's child. He was Daniel's. The room seemed to blur. I sank into the chair, clutching the photo to my chest. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. My mind replayed every memory. Daniel coming home late those last few months, looking tired but happy, saying things like, "You'll be proud of me soon, Mom." I thought he meant a promotion. I never imagined he meant a family. Tears slipped down my cheeks. I whispered, "Oh, my boy, you had a son." When I returned to the hospital the next morning, I carried the photo with me. Sheriff Cole was already there, talking to April. When he saw me, his expression softened. "We confirmed it," he said quietly. "The fingerprints on the suitcase match Emily Rhodes's rental home. She was Daniel's fiancée. They were planning to marry before the accident." My knees nearly gave out. "Fiancé?" "Yes, ma'am." "He never told you." I shook my head. Cole sighed. "Sometimes kids keep things close to protect their parents. Maybe he wanted to surprise you. Or maybe I thought he didn't know how to tell me. Afraid I'd judge him, afraid I'd see her as taking him away from me. Grief plays tricks with memory. It makes you remember only the gaps. I looked toward the nursery window. The baby, Daniel's son, was sleeping peacefully, his little hand curled near his cheek. And I knew in that moment that my life had just changed again. That night, I stood on the porch once more. The lake was calm, a perfect mirror reflecting the stars. I held the photo in one hand and whispered into the night. "You can rest now, Daniel. I found him. He's home." And for the first time since the accident, I felt a peace that wasn't heavy. It was light, fragile, but real. The morning after the truth came out, the lake looked different. It wasn't menacing anymore. It was still patient, like it had been waiting all along for someone to listen. But peace is a fragile thing. It doesn't stay unless you fight to keep it. That day, I had to face the question everyone was too polite to ask. Who would raise Daniel's son? Sheriff Cole was kind about it. "He's in protective custody for now, Mrs. Ellison," he said, his voice gentle. "Until the court decides." "The court?" I repeated. "But he's my grandson." He sighed. "I know. But without legal proof of custody, the system needs to step in. Don't worry. It's just procedure." Procedure. A word that sounds harmless until it's standing between you and your blood. I went home and sat in the living room, surrounded by Daniel's things. The photo of him and Emily lay on the table. The baby's name, Samuel, whispered itself in my mind again, heard by God. I whispered to the empty room. "Then hear me too." Every object around me seemed to carry a memory. The clock he'd fixed when he was 10. The armchair where we used to read together. The scarf Emily had knitted for him. Pale blue, same shade as the baby's blanket. I realized then that my house wasn't just full of memories. It was full of ghosts. That evening, I called Robert Henson, Daniel's old lawyer friend. He answered in his calm, measured tone. "Ruth, it's been years. I need your help, Robert," I said. "It's about Daniel's son." After I told him everything, he was silent for a long moment. Finally he said, "If you want to claim guardianship, we'll need to prove two things: biological relation and stable capacity for care. Are you ready for that?" I almost laughed. I've buried a husband, a son, and nearly a lifetime of silence. "Yes, I'm ready." He chuckled softly. "That's the Ruth I remember." The following days blurred into a rhythm of paperwork and waiting. DNA confirmations. Court forms. Endless signatures. But through it all, I found a quiet strength rising inside me, something I thought I'd buried with Daniel. Maura visited once during that week. She looked fragile but steadier than before. She was volunteering at the local shelter now. Cleaning, cooking, keeping busy. "I'm glad you're finding your footing," I told her. She smiled faintly. "You helped me remember I'm still human." I placed a hand over hers. "We all lose ourselves sometimes. What matters is finding our way back." She hesitated, then said softly, "If you get custody of him, promise me you'll tell him about her. About Emily." "I will," I said. "He deserves to know the truth. All of it." Maura's eyes filled with tears. "Thank you." When the court day came, I wore Daniel's favorite scarf, navy wool with a small tear near the edge. It felt like armor. The courtroom was small, sunlit, quiet except for the shuffle of papers. Across from me sat a social worker, kind but distant, and a judge who looked older than time itself. Robert stood by my side. He spoke calmly, presenting the DNA results, the evidence of Daniel's paternity, the photo of him and Emily. I didn't speak until the judge asked me directly. "Mrs. Ellison," he said, "raising a child at your age is no small task. Why do you wish to do this?" I took a deep breath. Because I wasn't here to fight for ownership. I was here to fight for belonging. "Your Honor," I began, "I've lived long enough to know what loss feels like. To lose a son, a husband, even your faith in people. But when I found that child by the lake, I didn't see a burden. I saw a second chance. Not for me, but for my family." I paused, meeting his eyes. "I can't promise I'll live forever. But I can promise that while I'm here, that boy will never feel abandoned again." The room was silent for a long moment. Then the judge nodded slowly. Weeks passed before the decision arrived. The envelope came one morning with the mail. Plain, official, almost indifferent in its appearance. My hands trembled as I opened it. The court had granted me temporary guardianship pending further review. It wasn't permanent, but it was enough. I pressed the letter to my chest and whispered, "Thank you." Later that day, I went to the hospital one last time to bring Samuel home. April met me at the door, beaming. "He's ready," she said. "You'll need to feed him every 3 hours. He's got quite an appetite." I laughed softly. "Like his father." She handed him to me, warm, breathing, fragile. And for a brief, infinite moment, time stopped. His tiny fingers curled around mine. And I realized that every loss I'd endured had led me here, to this heartbeat, this fragile thread of life reconnecting what grief had broken. That night, I rocked him to sleep in the same chair where I'd once held Daniel. The house was quiet again, but not empty. As I hummed a lullaby, I felt tears spill freely, not of sadness, but of release. Outside, the lake shimmered under the moonlight, calm and forgiving. I whispered to it, "You've taken enough from me. Now, let this be your gift back." The water didn't answer, but the wind carried a warmth through the window. Soft, gentle, like a sigh of peace. The first night home with Samuel, the house learned a new rhythm. Not the old aching silence, a softer pulse.
warm milk warming on the stove, the hush of a lullaby, the tiny swallow of a mouth trying its best to belong to this world. At 2 in the morning, I laughed at myself for fumbling the swaddle I used to do with one hand. My knees ached when I stood. My back protested when I sat. Age is honest that way. But when Samuel's fingers wrapped around the edge of my cardigan and wouldn't let go, I forgot the arithmetic of years. I only knew the math of breath and heartbeat, of one life leaning on another. By dawn we had survived 3 feedings and 1 spectacular diaper. I made tea while he slept on my chest, his ear pressed to the place where my heart has always kept the loudest room. Outside, a pearl-grey mist hovered over the lake. Loons called to each other across the water, long echoing notes that sounded like old stories finding their way back. I opened the window a crack. Samuel stirred, then settled, as if he had been listening for that sound all along. We found a pattern in those first days. Mornings were for sun patches on the kitchen floor and the kettle's steady whisper. Afternoons were for short walks to the porch, where the lake kept its own counsel. Evenings belonged to the rocking chair and the stories I told both of us, about Daniel climbing the maple with a pocketful of marbles, about the summer he learned the names of clouds, about the day he decided bridges were just kindness made into architecture. Sometimes I caught myself saying your father without thinking and felt the small shock of it travel through me like light. April stopped by on her way home from the hospital with the solemn authority of someone who had measured 1,000 heartbeats. She checked Samuel's color, his weight, the latch of his little mouth. "You're both doing fine," she said, smiling at the both. Then she set a small wind-up music box on the table. "Found this in the lost and found forever ago. No one claimed it. I thought maybe he could. I wound it gently." The melody spilled out, simple, bell-like notes that wove themselves around the room. To my surprise, Samuel's eyes fluttered open and he looked toward the sound. Not a miracle, I told myself. Just neurons learning. But when the tune reached the turn I recognized from a hymn my mother used to hum over a pot of soup, I let myself believe it could be both. On the 3rd day, Sheriff Cole called. His voice held that careful tone good men use when they must talk about harm. "Ruth," we traced the mirror fragment. "Belongs to a tan sedan rented 2 months ago. We pulled traffic cams from the county line. We have footage of the car near Millstone. And something else." I waited. "Maura's in the passenger seat," he said. "Driver is a woman who matches Emily's description." I stood very still, one hand on the back of a kitchen chair. So Maura was with her. We also found evidence at a different cabin than the one she mentioned. Used recently for childbirth. We think she panicked afterward. Sometimes people do the wrong thing trying to do the next thing. When I hung up, the room felt larger, then smaller, then exactly the size it had always been. Mercy can be like that, stretching you, then fitting you, then asking you to stretch again. That afternoon, Maura came by. She stood on the porch with her hands jammed into the pockets of her blue coat, the way a child brings both apology and weather in with her. "They told me," she said, "about the footage." I nodded. "It's true," she whispered. "Emily picked me up from the diner when the pains started. I kept telling her we should go to a hospital, but she said no. Said people had talked enough already. We found a cabin. I did what I could, but I'm not a nurse. There was so much, not blood like in the movies, just time. Too much of it." She swallowed. "When the baby came, he was quiet. Emily fainted. I thought he was gone. I wrapped him because I couldn't bear for him to be cold. I put him in the suitcase because there was nothing else clean. I meant to drive to town, but I kept hearing water. I went to the lake. I set him down. I told myself I'd look for help. I told myself a lot of things." Her eyes searched mine for a verdict. "I came back," she said, "the last defense of the guilty and the saved. You were already there." I let the silence hold both of us for a while. "Sometimes," I said, "we're spared by the very thing we fear. Sometimes it's water. Sometimes it's the sound of our own shame." Maura nodded, tears catching at the edge of her mouth. "I don't know how to make it right." "You don't," I said gently. "You let rightness make you. It takes time. It takes telling the truth again, and again, until it fits." She glanced past me. "Can I see him?" From the doorway. I thought of all the doors I had closed against myself over the years and opened the one between us. Samuel slept in his basket on the kitchen table, sun laying a warm coin on his forehead. He did not wake. Mara pressed a knuckle to her lips like a woman watching a sunrise she didn't think she'd ever see again. "Goodbye," she whispered to him, and to something else I could not name. Nights grew easier by degrees so small I only saw them when I looked back. I learned the map of his cries and he learned the shape of my shoulder. We invented a new language with 3 verbs: eat, sleep, belong. Sometimes belonging took the longest. One evening I carried him down to the dock just as the sky unclasped and let its colors fall. The loons called again. Far across the water, a heron lifted itself from the reeds with a patience I envied. Samuel turned his head toward the sound and made a small, surprised noise that wasn't quite a laugh and wasn't not. "It's just the lake talking," I told him. "It says you are heard." He blinked up at me, serious, wise in the unfurnished way of the very new. There, beside the old piling where Daniel had once tied his first canoe with 3 knots too many, I noticed a sliver of metal caught under a slick of algae. I crouched, slid it free, and wiped it with the corner of my sleeve. It was a ring. Simple. Brass warmed by time. Inside, 2 letters scratched by a pocketknife's faith. E+D. For a moment the world sharpened so sweetly it hurt. I closed my hand around the ring and felt it brand my palm with something older than possession. "I'll keep this for you," I told the water, and the woman it had not kept, and the boy it had returned. The next Sunday, I dressed Samuel in a soft white onesie and we walked to the little church on the hill. I hadn't been in months. Grief had made me polite with God. Hello at the mailbox, nod from the sidewalk, no invitations inside. But that morning I wanted the kind of quiet that listens back. We sat in the last pew because leaving early is a dignity sometimes. The sanctuary smelled of wood polish and lemon and the faintest shadow of Easter lilies that refused to learn the calendar. Reverend Miguel read a psalm about waters that do not drown and fires that do not burn. When the choir hummed the recessional, I recognized the melody from April's music box and smiled at the way the world ties its own ribbons, whether we notice or not. After the service, a circle formed around Samuel the way circles do around news too tender to touch. An old carpenter with hands like prayer offered to fix the porch step. A teacher brought a stack of board books whose corners had already been loved right. Someone left a casserole on my back seat without making me promise to return the dish. None of it asked who I had been. All of it blessed who we might now be. On the walk home, a boy on a bicycle swerved to avoid a pothole and called, "Nice baby," as if that were a thing one could earn. I tried the compliment on and found it fit. That night, when the house had finally exhaled itself into sleep, I sat at the table with Daniel's photo and the ring between us. I wrote a letter I did not know where to send. "Dear Emily," I began, and paused a long time. "I found the boy you loved. He is safe. He is stubborn about staying awake after midnight, and his left hand already prefers the world. He likes the sound of loons, and the kettle, and a hymn your son's grandmother can't quite sing on key. If you can hear this the way water hears, know that we will say your name to him, not as a cautionary tale, not as a secret, but as the first gift he ever received." I folded the paper and slipped it into the back of Daniel's photo frame, where a small absence had been waiting for a purpose. Then I wound the music box, set it on the windowsill, and let its quiet bravery spill into the room. Samuel sighed in his sleep. The lake, I swear it, breathed back. The days slipped into one another the way ripples meet, quietly, without argument. Autumn was arriving. I could smell it before I saw it. The faint musk of fallen leaves, the sweet exhaustion of the earth preparing to rest. Samuel had grown heavier in my arms, his laughter blooming like something that had been waiting for permission. His eyes, Daniel's eyes, followed the sunlight across the curtains every morning as if remembering the world from before. I'd never thought I'd raise a child again. But life, in its strange mercy, doesn't ask if you're ready. It simply hands you the moment and watches what you do with it. Every night, after he fell asleep, I sat by the window with the ring, E+D, resting in my palm. The brass had dulled, but the engraving still caught the light. A promise, small but stubborn, refusing to fade. One morning, a letter arrived from the county courthouse. The envelope was stamped in that same cold grey ink that always makes your stomach twist. Inside was a notice: the hearing for permanent guardianship. I had 2 weeks to prepare. Robert came by that afternoon, the kind of friend who fills silence instead of breaking it. He read the papers, then looked up. They'll ask the same questions again: health, finances, emotional stability. But they'll also want to know why you believe you're the right guardian for the child of Daniel and Emily Rhodes. I smiled faintly. Because love isn't a reason you prove. It's a reason you live. He chuckled softly. The law likes measurable answers, Ruth. Then I'll give them both. That evening, after Samuel fell asleep, I took out the photo of Daniel and Emily. I'd kept it in a frame on the kitchen counter, not to mourn, but to remind myself that love, even brief, leaves fingerprints on the world. I began writing again. Not for the court, but for him. For Samuel, the boy who would one day want to know where he came from. Dear Samuel, when the lake gave you back to me, I didn't know who you were. I only knew that you were worth saving. Later I learned you were Daniel's son, and Emily's gift to a world too cruel to understand her. You may hear stories about her, some kind, some not. But know this: she loved you. And love, when it's deep enough, doesn't end. It changes form, that's all. There's a ring I'll give you when you're old enough to understand promises. Inside are the letters of 2 people who believed that love could build bridges even time couldn't wash away. When you hold it, remember, forgiveness is the other half of love. I sealed the letter and tucked it beside the ring in a small cedar box, one that Daniel had made for me when he was 12. 4 years, it had been empty. Now, it held 2 generations of hope. As the court date approached, the air grew colder. The lake mirrored the sky. Grey, still, waiting. On the morning of the hearing, I wore Emily's scarf. It smelled faintly of lavender and memory. The courtroom was brighter this time, filled with light that had no business being that gentle. The judge was the same, his eyes kind but sharp. Robert began with the documents: proof of income, house inspection, medical certificate. Then he handed over a letter, my own. I had written it for the judge, though it read more like a confession. Your Honor, the law protects the living. But sometimes, it forgets the dead still have stories left to finish. I'm not asking for custody because I want to rewrite the past. I only want to give the past a safe place to rest. This boy carries the blood of both loss and love. If he grows up in my care, he'll learn that neither is something to be ashamed of. When I finished reading, the courtroom was quiet. Even the judge looked away for a moment, maybe to hide what time had softened in him too. He cleared his throat. Mrs. Ellison, the court sees no reason to deny your petition. Guardianship is granted, permanent, pending annual review. I exhaled slowly, like I'd been holding my breath for years. When we got home, the lake was shining again, a mirror of silver beneath the autumn sun. I sat with Samuel on the porch swing, the decree folded in my pocket like a letter to the future. The wind played with his hair, fine and soft as feathergrass. I whispered, "You're home, my love." He cooed, as if answering. I thought about Emily then. What would she have wanted for him? Not perfection. No mother ever truly wants that. Just safety. And gentleness. And someone who will look at her child and see not what was lost, but what remains. That, I could promise. A week later, Mara returned. Her hair was shorter, her posture straighter. Healing, I've learned, doesn't make you someone new. It just lets you stand inside your old self without shaking. I'm leaving town, she said. Going to live with my aunt in Missouri. I just wanted to say goodbye. I hugged her tightly. Take care of yourself, dear. She pulled back, her eyes misty. You already did. As she walked down the path, I noticed she left something on the porch railing, a folded piece of paper. Inside was a drawing, clearly from her hand, a lake under the moonlight, a woman holding a baby, and above them, written in careful print, mercy belongs to those who look back and still choose love. I pressed it to my heart. That night, I took Samuel down to the lake one last time before winter. The surface was calm, the air sharp and clean. I carried the small cedar box, the ring, the letters, the proof that love had found its way through storms and silence. Kneeling by the water, I whispered, Daniel, Emily, he's safe now. You can rest. I set the box in the reeds, not to bury it, but to let the lake keep watch, its own kind of baptism. Samuel stirred in my arms, his tiny hand brushing against my chin. I kissed his forehead and smiled through tears. The moon broke free from the clouds, painting the water in silver threads. For the first time, the lake looked not like something that takes, but something that returns. Winter came like a soft correction, erasing the edges of everything that had felt too sharp. The lake put on its quiet armor of ice at the coves first, then along the dock, as if teaching me how to be still without becoming hard. Samuel and I learned winter together. He discovered the astonishment of his own breath in the cold, little clouds blooming and disappearing like secrets that didn't need keeping. I discovered that my knees can negotiate with snow better than pride can. If you go slow, if you let yourself be helped. The neighbors cleared the walkway without asking. The boy on the bicycle, now bundled like a quilt, rang our bell and left a paper bag of ginger cookies on the steps. I put one on my tongue and it tasted like December doing its best. Most mornings, I wore the ring on a thin chain and tucked it into my sweater. Brass against bone, a vow warming the place where the body remembers first. I had set the cedar box in the reeds that night not to abandon it, but to let the water bless it. The next afternoon I retrieved it, dry at the edges, smelling faintly of cattails and old stories. It lives now in the top drawer of my desk beside the extra fountain pen and the postage stamps I keep meaning to use. Samuel's checkup came the week the first true storm announced itself against the windows. April weighed him, hummed the music box tune without noticing, and pronounced the most expensive word in the English language. Thriving. Does he always look at people like that? She asked, amused. How's that? I said. Like he's memorizing them for later. Maybe he is, I answered. We owe him a lot of later. The guardianship decree sat in a folder on the counter, practical as bread. I read it sometimes the way some read psalms, not for information but for assurance. Still, paper has limits. So Robert and I filled out more of it. A will, a medical proxy, a list of people who would stand if I could not. I chose simply. April, 1st. Reverend Miguel, 2nd. And a line that said, in matters of the boy's story, tell the truth even when it trembles. Are you sure? Robert asked gently. Some details might be hard when he's young. I don't mean all at once, I said. But no fables that make the hard parts smaller than they were. Love deserves better than that. He nodded, and for a moment we sat like two people who know that law can hold a house together but never the roof on in a storm. A postcard arrived from Missouri. A field of winter wheat on the picture side, pale gold under a white sky. Dear Ruth, it read in careful print. I am learning the names of birds from my aunt. There is one called a junco that hops like it forgot how to fly. I am sending $10 each month to the women's shelter. I am also learning to pray without argument. Thank you for teaching me a way to stay in the room with my life. Mara. I turned the card over and traced the cancel stamp with my thumb. There are people who will not understand why I kept the card on the refrigerator. They will think forgiveness means forgetting. It does not. It means remembering with the kind of attention that makes a next time different. We kept our small rituals, the kettle's old hymn, the evening rocking, the porch no matter how brief. On Tuesdays, we walked to the church's weekday hour. Not a service, just a shared silence. Samuel would fall asleep against my chest, his breath agreeing with the room. And there I would speak the names, in order, like beads. Daniel, Emily, Mercy, tomorrow. One such Tuesday, I realized I had been calling him my sweet boy and little love so faithfully that his name, Samuel, had become a guest at his own party. Names matter. They teach the world how to say yes to you. They teach you how to answer. That night, by the kitchen lamp's soft circle, I opened the cedar box and held the ring in my palm. E plus D, I whispered, equals far more than 2. I wrote another letter, shorter this time. To the clerk of court. I wished to add a middle name to the record, Rhodes. Not to complicate things, but to complete them. Samuel Rhodes Ellison. So he belongs to both bridges that built him. When the certified copy arrived weeks later, I traced the whole name with my finger the way one traces a scar that finally feels like skin. The storm finally delivered what it had been promising for days. Snow laid its careful hand over the yard. The old maple wore a crown only humility knows how to balance. We lit the fireplace at noon and let it speak in the language of contained flame. I made soup the way my mother had, onion first, then the forgiveness of carrots, the honesty of potatoes, the small golden stubbornness of corn. When the pot began to whisper and the house filled with the exact memory of being cared for, I thought of the first week after Daniel was born, how Mark had stood in this same kitchen and burned toast with the pride of a man who had outrun his own fear. I told Samuel the story, because stories don't need the facts to line up to give you what you need. Your grandpa loved you long before he knew your name. He practiced it on the porch as if names were instruments you could get good at. Samuel answered with that open-mouthed laugh that makes you believe in the day even when it is already dusk. The thaw began early that year, a compromise between winter and mercy. The lake shrugged off its thin glass and remembered its verbs: ripple, carry, return. On the first day the dock creaked like its old self. We went down together. The wind tucked itself around us, though it owed us nothing. I brought a small mason jar with folded strips of paper inside. On each, a promise I could keep. We will say her name when we say grace. We will visit the bridge when you are ready. We will keep your first lullaby, even if we forget the notes. We will tell the truth kindly. We will not be afraid to be happy. Choose one, I said, and of course he chose at random, the way the best vows often begin. He grabbed the third and drooled on it for good measure. I read it aloud. We will keep your first lullaby, even if we forget the notes. So I hummed imperfectly, to the same water that had once frightened me. The song did not mind the wrong turns. Samuel tucked his face into my shoulder and confirmed what the world keeps trying to teach, that love does not require you to be in tune to be true. On the way back up the path, I noticed a new growth near the stump where lightning had ended a birch last spring, a tight fist of green shouldering through last year's leaves. The past does not agree to move, not really, but it learns, sometimes, how to make room. That afternoon, I called Reverend Miguel. I'd like a blessing, I said. Not a service. Just something that says out loud what's already true. We stood by the kitchen table, the everyday altar where soup cools, where letters are folded, where the cedar box rests. He placed his palm over Samuel's head the way you hold a small bird you intend to release. May your names hold you, he said, when days are louder than your heart. May your home teach you that enough is a beautiful word. May you never confuse silence with absence. May the waters that tried to take your story remember now how to return it. I closed my eyes. The amen felt like air finding its proper lungs. That night, after the house settled and the kettle clicked itself quiet, I took out my journal, the one that began when everything began again. Today. He learned the corner of his own mouth. The lake learned a new color when the clouds moved. I learned that my fear of outliving joy was a superstition. Joy is not a person you can outlive. Maura learned a bird. April learned another heartbeat into courage. Robert learned the law can be tender in the right hands. And Emily, I hope she learned that her name is safe here. I placed the journal back beside the cedar box. The chain warmed against my skin. Samuel sighed in his sleep as if turning a page. Outside, the lake did what lakes do, received the moon without owning it. Returned the light it never asked for. Kept the shore from forgetting where to stand. Tomorrow will come with its small requests, diapers and bills, soup and snowmelt, the doorbell and the kettle and the neighbor with a story longer than the afternoon. I will meet it with the only arithmetic that has ever balanced for me. One breath, then another. One kindness, then the next. Names remembered in the right order. This is the promise. Not that nothing will break, but that when it does, we will know how to hold the pieces without cutting each other. I turned the music box key until it refused another turn and let it speak into the dark. A thin courage. A sturdy mercy. A song we will learn again tomorrow, and the day after that, until even our forgetting remembers. Spring came late that year, as if the earth itself had been thinking things over. The lake, which had spent months pretending to be asleep, began to breathe again. Slow, wide, forgiving breaths that carried the scent of thawed mud and the faint sweetness of life coming back. The birch stump by the path had kept its promise. What had been a tight green fist was now a small, defiant sapling, leaning toward the light like someone remembering how to pray. Samuel had grown too, and faster than I was ready for. He was crawling now, pulling himself toward anything bright. Sunlight, spoons, my reading glasses. The world, to him, was a room that kept saying yes. I'd learned to say yes more often too. Yes to the neighbor's invitation for coffee. Yes to April's idea of starting a story circle for young mothers at the church. Yes to letting people carry the heavy groceries without pretending I was still 30. Life, I've discovered, doesn't reward endurance. It rewards softness, the courage to stay open after everything tries to make you close. One Sunday morning, Reverend Miguel called. "Ruth," he said, "the congregation wants to do something for you and Samuel. Nothing grand. Just a welcome." I hesitated. A welcome. Yes. A naming. We thought maybe it's time his story belongs to more than just the two of you. Something in my chest ached, not from pain, but from the tenderness that comes when you realize people have been quietly loving you from afar. So I said the word that has become my second act of faith. Yes. The following week, the church filled with the smell of lilacs and wood polish. No pews were empty. Even Mara came, standing shyly in the back, her blue coat freshly pressed, her smile smaller but steadier. April held Samuel while I walked down the aisle. The light from the high windows spilled across the floor like a promise finally keeping itself. Reverend Miguel began gently. "Today, we gather not to baptize what's new, but to bless what's been returned." He invited everyone who had touched our story, April, Robert, the sheriff, the neighbors, to step forward and place a hand on the old cedar box sitting on the table beside the pulpit. Inside it were the ring, the letters, the journal entries, and the first drawing Mara had given me. Mercy belongs to those who look back and still choose love. The Reverend continued. We stand not to erase sorrow, but to name what has outlasted it. Kindness, forgiveness, and the bravery of beginning again. Then he looked at me. "Mrs. Ellison, what name do you give this child?" My voice trembled, but it was clear. "Samuel Rhodes Ellison," I said. "For the bridge that carried him here, built by Emily's courage, Daniel's love, and the mercy of the water that let me find him." The room was quiet, but it wasn't silence. It was the kind of stillness that happens when truth finally fits the space it belongs to. After the service, people lingered longer than they needed to. Someone had baked cinnamon bread. Children chased each other between pews. The sheriff stood by the door, eyes misty. "Never thought I'd see a case end like this," he said. "Feels more like grace than justice." "Maybe they're the same thing," I said softly. Outside, the air was warm with that particular light only April afternoons carry, a light that forgives everything it touches. Mara came to me last. She held a small envelope. "For Samuel," she said. Inside was a single feather, thin and silver white. "From a junco," she explained. They don't fly far, but they always find home. I smiled. So do we. A week later, I took Samuel to see the Millstone Bridge. It was early morning, the sky just learning its colors again. The bridge stretched over the river like a sentence without an ending. Strong, quiet, incomplete in the way all real things are. I parked the car and carried him to the center, the same place where Daniel's car had been found years ago. The water below shimmered gold, restless and kind. This is where your father built something, I told him. And where it almost ended. But see, it didn't. He reached for the railing, laughing at the echo his small hand made on the wood. I took out a folded piece of paper from my pocket. Another letter, one I'd written the night before. Dear Daniel, I thought losing you would be the end of every good thing. I was wrong. You left me the kind of love that multiplies when it's broken. You left me a son who built bridges in more ways than one, and a grandson who taught me that mercy has a face. The lake gave me back what life had taken. I've forgiven the water. I think you would have too. I tucked the letter into a small crevice in the bridge's railing, a secret between wood and wind. Then I whispered, you can rest now. On the drive home, Samuel fell asleep in his car seat, his tiny fingers clutching the ring I had slipped onto a string around his wrist. I glanced at him in the rearview mirror, and for a moment, the sunlight hit just right, and I could have sworn I saw Daniel's reflection smiling back. It wasn't ghostly or sad. It was like the quiet satisfaction of a man who knows his story has finally found its ending. That evening, as the sun sank low over the lake, I set Samuel in his crib and went to the porch. The air smelled of rain and possibility. I sat with a blanket on my knees and the music box beside me, winding it one last time. The melody floated out. Fragile, imperfect, whole. And in that moment, I felt every person who had ever loved and been lost standing beside me. Daniel, Emily, Mara, my late husband, even the nameless ones who had left kindnesses along the way. All of them, quiet, patient, as if the universe itself had leaned in to listen. I spoke softly into the dusk. We're all just bridges, aren't we? Between the ones who came before and the ones who will outlive us. And if we're lucky, what crosses us isn't just memory, it's love. The lake shimmered in answer. Somewhere across the water, a loon called, not mourning, not warning, just singing. I smiled, the way you do when you've made peace with time. Samuel stirred inside the house, letting out a small cry that quickly faded into the calm of sleep. I whispered to him, though he couldn't hear me. Rest easy, little bridge builder. Tomorrow's waiting for you.